Hello everyone, this is Sam from Logic and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we will analyse the logical patterns of verbs and how we can construct short answers. In English we have two main categories of verbs. We have normal, simple verbs that I also call weak, and we have special verbs that I also call strong. And this difference is very important for the analysis that we'll carry out today together. A verb can come in three main forms: affirmative, negative, and interrogative. We will see how we create them with the strong verb can and the weak verb to speak, and we will conjugate them in the present simple. And let's remember that to conjugate a verb means to connect the verb to its subject. The affirmative form expresses the truth and validity of a statement. I've also included to do because we will need it later. And as we can see, speak becomes speaks and do becomes does for the third person singular. And later we will see why can doesn't do that. The negative form expresses the falsity of a statement. We can also say that it denies it or negates it. In English, the negation is created with the word not, but let's see how different verbs react to it. Can, as we said before, is a strong verb, so it has enough strength to simply accept the not, so we get can not, or can't, or cannot. What happens to speak though? Because to speak is a weak verb, it doesn't have enough strength to simply accept the not, but it needs the help of another verb that takes the not and protects speak. This verb is called auxiliary, and in this case is the verb to do. So what happens now? We put do after the verb and we conjugate it to it. Then do absorbs the negative, so it becomes do not, or don't, and does not, or doesn't, and in this way it protects the verb to speak. Something happens to the third person singular because speaks loses its s. Why is that? Since in the negative, to do is the conjugated verb, that is the one that absorbs the s of the third person singular, while the following verb, in this case to speak, loses its s and goes back to the base form, just like all the other pronouns in the conjugation. We can also look at this from a slightly different perspective. In English, we only say things once. So if I say doesn't, I already know that we're talking about the third person singular because the s is already there. So we don't need to repeat it by adding it to the verb speak as well. The interrogative form is the question form that ends in a question mark. In English, the interrogative form is created with an inversion of the subject and the verb. Since can is a strong verb, it can do a very simple and visible inversion by simply swapping places with a subject. To speak, on the other hand, is too weak to simply change position, so again, it needs the help of an auxiliary verb, to do, which absorbs the inversion and does it instead of speak, so we get do I speak. The same way we say he doesn't speak, where doesn't absorbs the s. We say does he speak because the s that we only say once goes into the auxiliary and not into the base form of the verb. So, as a quick recap, if a verb in English creates the negative by simply adding not and an interrogative with a simple inversion, it's a strong verb. If, however, it needs the help of to do as an auxiliary verb, it's a weak verb. The majority of verbs are normal and weak. We only have a handful of special verbs, and these are divided into two main categories: auxiliary verbs and modal verbs, the function of both of which is to help the main verb, which is the verb that has the most important meaning in the sentence. Modal verbs are usually considered a subcategory of auxiliary verbs, so technically I should call them auxiliary modal verbs, but I prefer separating them completely because they have different properties. In this video, we will not investigate functional differences between auxiliaries and modals, because I will do that in another video. Here, we will see how they behave compared to normal verbs. As a quick overview, auxiliary verbs create a grammatical context for the main verb. To be creates the continuous and passive form of the main verb. To do creates the negative and interrogative, and to have creates the perfect form. Modal verbs, on the other hand, give a different flavour to the main verb. Can give the idea of ability, and mustn't, for example, can give the idea of a ban, of a prohibition. Let's look at the auxiliary verbs one by one. The conjugation of the verb to be is completely irregular, and it also comes with contractions. Since to be is strong, we create its negative by simply adding not, and we also have contractions for that, and we create the interrogative with a simple inversion. Let's look at the pronunciation of the negative of the second person singular, for example. In British English, we pronounce it as aren't, where the R is completely silent. It's important to notice that each auxiliary verb can be a main verb with its own meaning, and also an auxiliary verb, where it only helps another verb. The verb to be, as an auxiliary verb, creates the continuous form of the main verb, or the passive. As a main verb, however, the verb to be means to exist, to find yourself in a specific place. So if I say I am in London, am is the only verb of the sentence, so it's the main one, and it means that I live, I exist, I find myself in London. Whether the verb to be is a main verb or an auxiliary verb, its behaviour doesn't change, both in the present and in the past. The verb to have is a little different. As an auxiliary verb, it's used to create the perfect aspect of a verb, and it is strong, and its behaviour is the same in the present and in the past. But what happens when to have is a main verb? Its meaning is to own something, so it expresses the idea that something belongs to you. For example, I have a dog. Or it also delivers the idea of doing an activity. For example, to have a shower. When to have is a main verb, it stops being special and becomes a normal, simple verb that needs help. And this is a very important element to remember because it's a very commonly mistaken structure. The affirmative form is the same as for the auxiliary verb, I have. But the negative is not haven't anymore because have is now a weak verb and it needs the help of the auxiliary to do. So it becomes I don't have or he doesn't have. And the same concept applies to the interrogative form. Saying I haven't a dog or have you a dog doesn't exist, and it's considered a very big mistake in English exams. The same principle applies to the simple past. To have is an irregular verb, which means it has a different affirmative form of the simple past, which is had. But because it's a weak verb, the negative is not I hadn't a dog, but it is I didn't have a dog. And the question is not had you a dog, but did you have a dog? The confusion between haven't and don't have stems from the fact that we can use have as an auxiliary verb as well, which is strong, but also from the fact that we have one more way of expressing have as a main verb, which is have got. Have got has the same meaning as have, so I can say I have got a dog or I have a dog. The meaning doesn't change. But have got basically behaves like a strong verb, so it doesn't need the help of an auxiliary verb for the interrogative and the negative form. So we say I haven't got a dog and have you got a dog? So when do we use have and when do we use have got? They mean exactly the same thing, but first of all, have got is mainly British, and even we don't use it very often anymore. And when we do, it's mainly in an informal style. There is technically a slight difference that was more prominent in the past, whereby have as a main simple verb used to be used mainly for repeated actions, whereas have got was used for one-off situations. When to do is an auxiliary verb, it's used to create the negative and interrogative form of a simple normal verb. But when it's a main verb, it means to perform an activity, to carry out an activity. So to do your homework means to carry out, to perform your homework. And it's a normal, simple verb itself, which means that it needs the help of another verb for the negative and interrogative. And funnily enough, it's itself. So in the affirmative, we say, I do my homework. But what happens in the negative? A lot of learners would say, I don't my homework. And this would be unfortunately incorrect because saying I don't my homework means that to do is a strong verb that doesn't need any help. But we've said that to do as a main verb is indeed a weak verb, so it does need some help. And in order to understand how we create its negative, we're going to look at another construction. If I say I don't run, which is correct, we can see that the auxiliary verb don't only conveys the idea of the negative, so mentally we can see don't as not. So if I say I don't my homework, I'm basically saying I not my homework, but the main verb is missing, so what am I doing to my homework? Because of that, we need to say I don't do my homework. I know it sounds like a repetition, but that's the only way that we have in English to convey the negative of the verb to do as a main verb. If we follow the same logic, the interrogative form is not do you your homework, but we need to say do you do your homework, because the first do only creates the interrogative form of a simple verb. Now that we've looked at auxiliary verbs, let's have a look at modal verbs, which all share the same qualities. So for my examples, I will only use a couple of them because they all behave the same. First of all, they don't inflect, which means that they don't add the s to the third person singular. They are defective, which means they don't have the infinitive or participles, which in turn means they can't be conjugated in the past, future, perfect or continuous form, or in the imperative or subjunctive. Can and could can be seen as an exception because could can be used as an irregular past of can. So I can say today she can run and yesterday she could run. Could is also used for conditionals. The same principle applies to will and would, because would can be used as the past form of will. So if I say we think he will recover, we can also say yesterday we thought he would recover. They are followed by the base form of the verb they help, without to. Ought to is the only exception, which is why it's sometimes considered a semi-modal. Since they are strong verbs, they create the negative with a simple not and its contractions, and they create an interrogative with the simple inversion. There are 3 exceptions. Although we hadn't better run is possible, we prefer saying we'd better not run. The contraction of may not doesn't exist, and although mightn't does exist, we usually prefer saying might not. All of this teaches us that we can identify a verb as strong or weak based on how it behaves in the negative and interrogative form. We can't say that looking at the affirmative form is 100% accurate because although modal verbs don't inflect, which is different from a simple verb, auxiliary verbs do inflect. We said the modal verbs don't have the infinitive form, but there are 2 of them that actually do, but they mean something completely different. To can something means to preserve something by putting it into a can, which is a metal container. So if I say to can tuna, that means to preserve tuna by putting it into a can. Which is why when we go to the supermarket, we find the canned foods section, where we find tuna, beans, meat and vegetables preserved in this manner. Also, if in spoken English I say can it means that I want you to stop talking. To will somebody to do something means to make something happen by thinking about it very hard. And to will something to somebody means to officially leave something to someone after you die. Let's have a look at how to have to do something and must do something behave differently. In this video, we will not analyse when to use which, but we will only see how they behave differently in a grammatical way. So, must is a special verb, so we say I must work. Must I work? I mustn't work. To have to, however, is a normal simple verb which needs the help of to do. So we say I don't or didn't have to work, and do or did I have to work. Saying I haven't or hadn't to work and have you or had you to work is considered a very big mistake in an English exam. We've seen that we created the interrogative form with an inversion of the subject and the verb. So we say, where are you? When is he arriving? But we need to look at the pronouns who and what because they behave differently in a question. When who and what are the objects of the question, the same rule of the simple inversion applies. So we say, who do you love? Where you is the subject, and I want to know the name of the person that you love. So who is an object. What do you want? You is the subject, and what is the object. But what happens when who and what are the subjects? When they are, there is no inversion in the question and they are considered a third person singular. So we say, who loves you, where who is the subject and you is the object. We can't say, does who love you? The same thing happens when we say, what is happening, where what is the subject. We can't say, is what happening. There is one more interrogative form that we can create called negative interrogative, which combines a negation and a question. The way we create it is by adding not after the subject, and in turn, this means that we add it between the subject and the main verb if we have it. So we can say, are you not English with only one verb, or are you not running? So the not is between the subject and running. We also have contractions that appear at the beginning of the question. So, aren't you English? Aren't you running? Can't you swim? When we use a negative interrogative in a yes or no question, it actually means that I already know or think I know the answer to the question and I just want to double check it. So, if I say, aren't you English? It means that I think or know that you are, so I expect you to say yes. If, however, we use the same construction with a WH question, this becomes a normal question. So if I ask you, why didn't you help them? I genuinely want to know the reason why you didn't help them. And this brings us to short answers. Short answers are yes or no answers, and there tends to be a lot of confusion as to how we create them. So if I ask you, can you speak English? Do we say, yes I can, yes I do, yes I can speak, yes I do speak? What is the right answer? What I find with most of my students is that they remember the short answers of structures that they've already studied in school. But when I show them a new verb, they can't give me an answer as to how we create the short answers because they don't know the logical pattern that lies behind them. Which means that luckily there is a pattern that we can follow, but instead of telling you with words, I will show you the logic behind it so it will stick in your mind even more. And we'll do that with colours. The pattern I'm showing you here is the formula that every short answer follows when we create it. And the same pattern, I promise, is the one that goes for the second sequence. So, based on these two sequences, what is the solution to the third one? If we look at the first two patterns, we see that they end with the same color that they started with. So in the first, we start with red and we finish with red. In the second one, we start with green and we finish with green. So in the third one, if we start with orange, we will have to finish with orange, which is our solution. Now, we'll do the same pattern, but instead of colors, we will use letters. If we have A, B, C, D, E, we will have to finish with A, the first letter of the sequence. Now, we will look at the same pattern, but with words coming from different languages. If I say, sea hablar chao como pizza, the solution will have to be sea, which is the first word of our sequence. Why am I doing this? I've realised that when I teach short answers to my students using English words, they don't even try to find the logical pattern behind them. And that's a very natural reaction, because if your brain sees words that it recognises, it gets distracted and starts trying to remember things that it has heard, seen, or studied in the past. So it doesn't focus on why we say things the way we say them, but it just focuses on what we say. Using letters, colours, or any other similar elements gets your brain thinking rather than remembering. What we need to take from these examples is the logical pattern the short answers follow. And now we will do this with English words. If I say pot, he, jug, the answer will be yes, he, pot. Now, these are indeed English words, but this question doesn't exist because both pot and jug are nouns, not verbs. But again, this is only so we get our brain thinking and trying to memorize the logical pattern. And now we will ask a real question. If I ask you, can you speak? We say, yes, I can, because we always need to end the structure with a word that started it. If we say, yes, I can speak, yes, I do speak, these are all incorrect because they don't follow the strict pattern. If I say, does he run? We say, yes, he does. And if I say, are you happy? We have to say, yes, I am. In this case, we need to change the conjugation of the verb to be because to be is extremely irregular, but the pattern is the same, repeating the first word of the question. If we want to give a negative answer, it is possible and we follow the same pattern, simply by putting not after the verb. So, might he help becomes no, he might not, or mightn't. What is important to notice is that if we want to give an affirmative answer, we can't use contractions. So if I say, have you done it? We can't say, yes, I've. We can only say, yes, I have. But with a negative answer, we can use a full answer or a contraction. So, no, I haven't, or no, I have not. The general rule for short answers is replying with yes or no, the subject, and then we copy whatever comes before the subject in the question. Let's look at some other examples. If we use the continuous form, we only repeat the verb to be. Are you going? Yes, I am. If we ask a question in the past, we use did. Let's have a look at how have got and to have behave with the meaning of owning. If I say, do you have a cat? You can only say, yes, I do, no, I don't. Saying, yes, I have, no, I haven't is a very big mistake in an English exam because it doesn't follow the pattern of repeating the first word of the question. If I say, have you got a cat? We say, yes, I have, no, I haven't. Using must and to have to is exactly the same. If I ask you a question with must, we repeat must. If I ask you a question with to have to, I would say, do you have to? And the answer will be, yes, I do, no, I don't. When we ask questions that combine modal verbs and auxiliary verbs, we can reply by simply repeating the first word, or we can also add on all the other auxiliary verbs that come with it. And that's it. As always, please don't forget to like this video and to subscribe to my channel down below, and also to leave comments and observations regarding this lesson or any other topics that you would like me to cover. And I will see you with my next video very soon.